We are now recording.
I should say I think it's heavily loaded with family. So those are the only people that are interested. They already know a little bit.
So I am Bruce Court, and I'm the chair of the B'nai Tzedek Israel Affairs Committee. I have the pleasure of doing this for a couple of years. And today we are very fortunate to have a special guest, Professor Dr. Miles Rubin, who is zooming in from Israel, from Haifa, in his apartment. Miles is a good friend and also a cousin. He's actually my wife, Lisa's first cousin. And I've adopted him and his wife, Lori. They're just some of the greatest people that you'll ever have an opportunity to meet. I've visited them in Israel, and they visited me here in the visited us here in the United States many times. And Miles earned a bachelor's degree at the University of Colorado and then a PhD at University of
Bruce,
California.
I'm gonna interrupt you.
Yes.
Lisa and Janice need to move farther away from you. You can really hear them.
Okay.
And,
Lisa,
and they need to go on. They need to
okay.
go on. They need to go on mute. So if they could press the mute button, that'd be great for everyone's sake. Thank you.
I've muted everyone actually, so it's not them. They need to just move. I think it's giving feedback.
Lisa, can you go to a different part of the house, please? So thank you, Alex.
We could go to the bedroom.
Go in the guest bedroom. So at any rate, we're correcting that technical difficulty right now. So at any rate, Miles earned a PhD at Berkeley. He's a brilliant guy and has done a lot of very interesting and groundbreaking research, and has also taught many PhD students. The multiplier effect of his work is really something. I can't even begin. He explained his work to me once over dinner in Israel, and it was about 40,000 feet over my skill level. At any rate, Miles is not going to speak about his work. He's going to speak about his experiences and what caused him to make Aliya. And I'm going to turn everything over to Miles, and I know we're going to enjoy his discussion. So thank you, Miles, for coming, and thank you for spending time with us.
Okay, well, thanks, Bruce, for the introduction, and thanks to the whole family that's there. I hope I don't embarrass anybody, and to the other members of the congregation. So you heard last month my colleague Donna Solov talk about her work in orthopedics, and it's really exciting work, and we're very happy to have her in the mechanical engineering faculty. She's a new faculty hire. You've probably also heard other talks from Technion people about their research, and you might know that there's a lot of activity at Technion which is related to the COVID pandemic, which is ongoing, and hopefully the virus will help us, but there's still a lot of things to solve. When Bruce asked me to talk, I told him, look, I'm a theoretician. I give talks all over the world, but every time I give a talk, it's got lots of equations. So that's not really appropriate. But I will take just a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about my research before starting the topic that really is the topic of the evening. First of all, my field is called Continuum Mechanics. And in some sense, I think of it as a theoretical umbrella for all of engineering, because as a special cases, you talk about the response of solids, the response of fluids. We talk about elastic materials, plastic materials, polymers, and thermodynamics, all in one framework. And much of my research in the last 40 years has been involved in what I call large deformation inelastic response. So let me give you an example, which I have here. And I want to talk about metal plasticity and metal elasticity. Now, everybody's seen a paperclip, right? And this one's pretty thin. I don't know whether you can see it, but in any case, you can see it's flat. Now, if I put it over a couple pieces of paper, I'll just do this here. You can see the normal way you clip a piece of paper, it's right there. And I pull it off, then what you see is it comes back and it's flat again. okay? Now that's called elastic response, and that's similar to what you get if you take a rubber band and you stretch it and you unload it and it comes back to its original shape. But if I try to put that paper clip over a whole chunk of material like this is paper, it's thick, and I squeeze it on here, and I push it on like that, and I take it off, what you can see is it's now permanently deformed. And that's what we call plastic response. And that's plastic response of metals. Now, plasticity, in my case, is used for penetration mechanics, which could be used for tanks. Now, that's not exactly what I do, but I do work in penetration mechanics. And that's an example of the difference between elastic response and plastic response in metals. Well, I've developed theories that are based on plasticity that we're interested in understanding, for example, facial tissue. Facial tissue is a tissue, right? And it's got inelastic response. And we're particularly interested in the rheology of facial tissue. I got involved a number of years ago with a colleague with a plastic surgeon who was dealing with facelifts. And we were interested in the rheology of facial tissue, which means kind of the time dependence of it. And we can see right here that I've got jowls that are drooping. Well, that's pretty easy because any tailor would tell you, if you pin your skin here and you pull on it with gravity, you're going to get a crease. Well, that's kind of what's happening with the face. But people were interested in trying to understand how could they improve their operation, the way that they were doing it, and we got involved in using equations to deal with that. And that led me to understanding better what I call growth and remodeling of tissue. Now, growth and remodeling is occurring all the time. Our bones remodel and our arteries remodel. And even right now, I'm working on some research that's related to trying to understand how to predict the stresses in arteries as they remodel, which could be under hypertension situations. So that's kind of the general thing. Also could be used for tumors, but this is a general theory that I'm working on. And right now I'm still playing with that. So instead of talking about the technical stuff, I suggested to Bruce, maybe I should talk about my personal journey and how I became a Zionist. And he encouraged me to do that. Now, all of you have your own personal stories, and I'm sure they're all special. I'm just going to tell you a few highlights of what's happened to me over the years that's caused me, let's say, to become a Zionist. Now, I'll begin with family roots. As far as I remember, and I could be wrong because my sister will tell you that I don't remember a lot about my youth, but I don't think my father's parents were Zionists, but definitely my mother's father was a Zionist. So Aliya, if you could put the first picture on. So let's see, I don't see it yet. Okay, good. Now this is a picture. The man on the left is my grandfather, our family's grandfather, Israel Reiskin. And next to him is Mary Reiskin, my grandmother. And Israel was born in Smolensk in 1898. He emigrated to the United States in 1912. And as you probably know, people that had got on a boat had to be at least 16 years old. So even though he was 14 years old, he was recorded as 16 years old when he arrived. Now, that's a good and a bad thing because when World War I broke out in 1917, he was really 19 years old, but he was recorded as 21, so they inducted him into the army. And he happened to be a prisoner of war during the war with Germany. So, but he came back to the United States, he started a family, and he was always interested in Palestine. This is a picture from, I think, either 1932 or 1933, when he brought the whole family to Palestine. And what you see is 3 kids sitting on a camel. On the right is my mother, Anita. And next to her is my uncle Leon. And next to Uncle Leon is my Aunt Janice. And Aunt Janice is with us today, and she lives in Potomac, Maryland. So they were all in Israel, and they were there for, at least the family was there, as I understand it, about a half a year. My grandmother finally said, I can't take this. She went back, and it was back and forth. But the main thing is, what I want to bring out is that he brought the family there to Israel in 1932. I don't know where this was taken, but it's obviously on the beach someplace. And actually, I've seen it a few times, but I didn't realize this camel's not real. Not only is it small, but it doesn't have any depth to it. So it's a little toy that they put up and everybody sat on it and they took a picture. Okay, now could you put, Atalia, could you put on the second picture? Unfortunately, my grandmother Mary died young, and my grandfather remarried. And the lady here, my grandfather's in the middle of this picture. This is in Jerusalem. And the lady next to him is Clara Singer. I don't know whether at the time they were married already or to be married. But in any case, she joined my grandfather for a number of years in his later life. And on the right of my grandfather is Chaim Reiskin. Now, Chaim Reiskin was a cousin of my grandfather, and he worked with my grandfather in his business in the DC area. And in early 1970, Chaim moved to Netanya. Chaim was a bachelor. He moved to Netanya and he made Aliya and he stayed in Netanya. And it turned out that when I was in Israel in kibbutz in 1973, I would take my leaves of absence from the kibbutz and go visit Chaim. We became very close. Chaim donated his inheritance, his estate to Technion, and he's honored by a path in the entrance of Technion. The main entrance of Technion has a sign, the Chaim Reiskin Path, and he also set up a scholarship for students from descendants of Sephardic families to try to help them with the finances of going to Technion. And Chaim, there's a big story about this. Now, can you put me back on, Talia? This is it? Okay. Chaim had a ring, which is this ring here. And I don't know whether you can see this ring really, but it's basically, it's got an HR on it, which is for Chaim Reiskin. And it's a lioness. I don't know whether you can see it, but it's a lioness. It has a diamond here, and it used to have two ruby eyes, but Chaim changed them to diamonds when he was in Netanya. He was given this, I think, right at the Depression. He had laid off from a job there, and he wore it all his life. And my parents were visiting Israel when he was actually in a nursing home, or not a nursing home, but a place where older people would stay by themselves. He took off the ring and he said, "Please give it to Miles." Now, I never had worn any jewelry, but I put this ring on and it's very comfortable and I've had it on ever since. And when I do my exercise walk around Technion, I go past his sign every single day and I look at the ring and I think about it. Now, let's move on. Uncle Leon Leon Reiskin, set up a special fund, which is called the Israel and Leon Reiskin Prize in Architecture. And it's really a special prize. It's for the best design project every year in Technion, in the architecture department. And fortunately, my cousins, Jonathan, Jeremy, and Matthew, his sons, are maintaining that. So I thank my cousins for the support. It's a great thing. It encourages the architecture students to do their absolute best. And it's really a very special prize that they all look forward to seeing who's going to win it and trying to win it. And it helps them a lot. My uncle believed very much that good people know what to do with money. So he tried to make a prize that was big enough that somebody could do whatever they wanted, go to Europe if they need to see business to the buildings or pay for their tuition. And it's a very special prize. It took a long time to develop, but he was able to do it. Now, my brother Gene and sister Lori and their families live in Northern Virginia, and they're listening in right now. I mentioned my Aunt Janice lives in Potomac, and I have cousins and their families living all over the DC area. Lori, my wife's family, is from Northern California near San Francisco. We'll talk about that later. Okay, a little bit about my Jewish education. Our family belonged to B'nai Israel, which was a conservative synagogue. It was on 16th Street at the time. And like most kids, or many kids anyway, I didn't continue my Jewish education after I was bar mitzvah. Now, in Haifa, we belong to the Moriah Synagogue, which is the oldest conservative synagogue in Israel. And I used to like reading Jewish philosophy. I kind of like the notion of Shabbat, that is taking a break from the normal life for at least for some period of time. But I don't like all the details of not driving and everything else. And I would say that I was more spiritual before coming to Israel than I am now. And that's possibly because the more I understand Hebrew, the less I like the prayers. So we don't really go to synagogue unless it's on high holiday, or if it's some simcha for our friends. But we feel committed. We want to be members, and we continue to be members. It's not as expensive as it is in the States, so we maintain it. Before coming to Israel, I had no idea how any Israeli could go to the beach on Rosh Hashanah. Now I know why, and I do it myself. So I would say we're really secular Israelis, but as I mentioned, we enjoy Kabbalat Shabbat, and we like to have it with our family, and it's very nice. And it's nice now we have our family actually visiting, and that's great. When I was a teenager, or a kid even, I was building mini bikes and go-karts, working on cars, and I rode a motorcycle. I don't remember discussing politics or the news at home. Now that might be because I was tuned out. My brother and sister might better understand, but I don't think it was part of our family life. And now it's really hard to believe. I was 16 years old when the Six-Day War was here in Israel, and I didn't have any idea what was happening, and it wasn't in my radar at all. So you can see I've gone a long way from then until now. Now, I went to Boulder, Colorado in 1969, starting my undergraduate degree. And as everybody knows, the spring of 1970 was a very tumultuous time. Nixon sent troops into Cambodia. There were shootings at Kent State, and there were Vietnam demonstrations and sit-ins and learn-ins all over college campuses. At CU, which is Colorado and Boulder, I joined a group called ASI, which is the Associated Students for Israel. And we used to meet once a month and discuss the importance of Israel to the Jewish people. Now, the Munich massacre of the Israeli Olympic athletes in 1972 really influenced me. It made me realize that the safety of Israelis and Jews in the world cannot be taken for granted. I decided during my undergraduate degree that I wanted to learn more about Israel. So I went to summer school, once at the University of Maryland in College Park and once in Colorado, and graduated a semester early. So I graduated in December of 72 instead of June of 73. And I took the next half year to go to live on a kibbutz and learn Hebrew. I was sent to a kibbutz called Ruchama, which was settled by mainly people from South America. And it's located in the northern part of the Negev, which is about 25 kilometers east of Gaza, which is not the greatest place to be right now, but that's where it is. Now, when I was there in 1973, there were about 50 volunteers. Of course, that doesn't happen now, but there were then. And about 25 of them came from the former Soviet Union, from Russia at the time. And it was very interesting to me. When we got there, we didn't have a common language. And the Russians did this. They give us sign language. And it took us a long time before well, not a long time, but we learned Hebrew. And finally, we could communicate. What they were saying is they were in prison. They were behind bars. And it's really the first time that I met people that didn't have freedom. I met people that were happy to read a newspaper and find out the news in the world as opposed to how many potatoes are grown in one place or another. That had a big impact on me. While on the kibbutz, I began to think about the role of the Jewish people in society, in the world, in civilization. Now, we're only 0.2% of the world population. That means 2 in 1,000. That's not much. We're really nothing. But if you think about it, the Jewish people have made contributions and will continue to make contributions that are really extraordinary. And because of that, I really feel it's important for me to be a member of the tribe. When I was in Israel, I noticed that many of the immigrants, if not most of the immigrants, came from countries where they really had bad situations. So they were fleeing countries to come to Israel. And in that sense, Israel really is a homeland for the Jews. It saved a lot of Jewish people from many tragedies. However, I wanted Israel to be more than that, not just a place where people who don't like where they are go to, but a place where good people, like from great countries like America, would want to come. And in the last decades, that's actually happened. You know, in Haifa, we have a high-tech industry. We have like a Silicon Valley. We have research centers for the major companies, tech centers in the world. We have Microsoft and Intel and Elbit and all kinds of companies. And companies are coming here for Israeli innovations in computers, data science, engineering, medical products, and military products. So that's right down, I can look down from our balcony and see this place called Matam, and it's right there, and many people are working there, and many people are working there from Technion, and they're contributing to the world. Now, while in kibbutz, I had a great time. I learned to milk sheep, which is not too difficult, but it was fun. I learned Hebrew, and I traveled around the country. But I also began to realize that for me, I needed something that's bigger, that had a bigger impact than just on my family and my friends. And in that sense, that attracted me to Israel. It also attracted me to being a university professor. And I think Bruce mentioned it a little bit earlier, but basically, when we teach students and have an impact on students, they have an impact on all their people that they meet. And that essentially amplifies our impact on those students. And you really can't quantify the impact of an individual teacher, whether it's high school or anything, on civilization, because they've impacted so many people who are then impacting so many people. And that's a really good feeling. I guess you'd say that my kibbutz experience when I was 21, 22, formulated my desire to live in Israel. Now, in August of 1973, I went and started graduate school at Berkeley. Now, during the Yom Kippur War, which broke out in October, I got involved in another organization. It's called the Israel Action Committee. And I blew my midterms and had to decide, did I want to be a politician or an engineering professor? Now, fortunately, I chose the latter because I would have been a really bad politician. At Berkeley, I was in what we called the 4-year to infinity club. What that meant is it took me 6 years to finish my PhD instead of 4. But I was very lucky. I had a wonderful advisor, Professor Paul Nagdi. I learned a lot from him, and I was very happy to do 2 extra years of research with him. From Berkeley, in 1979, I joined the Stanford Research Institute, SRI International, as a research engineer. And I enjoyed my work very much. But contract work was different, and I was frustrated because I felt like as soon as I began to understand a problem, the money ran out and I had to go do something else. So within the Institute, I was looking, there was a guy, Yogi Gupta, who was running a group, and they were doing more fundamental things. And I talked to Yogi about the possibility of joining his group as opposed to the one I was in. And then one day, Yogi came to me and he said, you know, Miles, I decided I'm going to go to the university. Well, that went click. I just decided this is the time to apply for a job in Israel. I went back that evening and talked to my girlfriend, Lori, who's now my wife, and told her of my plan. Well, she actually helped me type the letters of letters of application, which apparently were typed well. And I gotta say, while working at SRI, I continued my research in the evenings and the weekends, publishing papers, which is essential to getting a job in academics. And fortunately, Technion thought I was good enough and they gave me an offer as a lecturer. In talking about Aliya, I say that some of the most stressful things you can do in early life is get married, change your job, and move. Well, Lori and I got married on the 1st of August of 1982. As you can see, I have to read it because I don't remember the date. And we left and we arrived in Israel on the 6th of October, 1982. Well, Lori and I did all of those complicated things in life at once and added to it changing culture and language. When we arrived to a one-room apartment in the absorption center in Kiryat Yam, which is a small town north of Haifa. I must admit that when I went out of the apartment to get food for us for that day, I said to myself, what did I get us into? I took us from Palo Alto to this. So it was a big change. Fortunately, Lori is an adventurous person with a positive attitude. She left a loving family in San Mateo to join me on this adventure. Coming to Israel was certainly not the first thing in her life plan, but we've made good friends and have made a good life here. I can honestly say that if I wake, when every time I wake up in the morning and she's next to me, I know she loves me. And that just adds to the many reasons that I love her. Lori completed her undergraduate degree at Berkeley and got a master's in adult education at San Francisco State. In Israel, she worked teaching English to engineers and managers in high tech. And then it was interesting. You didn't just teach them English. You taught them how to tie a tie. You taught them how to say, I'm sorry, which never happens. I'm sorry, I'm late, which never happens in Israel. These are not words that are used in Hebrew. But she helped out a lot. She did that for many years. She volunteered for AACI, which is Association of Americans and Canadians in Israel, to help new immigrants that came to Haifa get organized and show them things and show them the places. And she also was an actress in a number of plays that were produced by the amateur Haifa English Theater here in Haifa. We have two sons, Adam, 35, and Daniel, 32, who both served 3 years in the Israeli army. Adam started as an Air Force cadet and ended as a medic in an artillery unit. Daniel served in this, well, I think it's famous 8200 intelligence unit. Adam married Donna, and they gave us two adorable grandsons, Leo, who's 5.5, and Tom, who's nearly 2. Adam completed his PhD in astrophysics at Weizmann Institute of Technology, and he started a 3-year postdoc at the European Southern Observatory in a suburb of Munich. That's where they're living now. And recently he took a position in the Institute as a staff scientist. Donna, his wife, studied industrial engineering at Ben Gurion University, and she got an MBA at Bar Ilan University, and she worked as head of marketing in a clothing industry Castro before leaving to Germany, and she now does internet marketing consulting. Daniel, our second son, married Sefi, and they live in Tel Aviv. Daniel studied psychology and economics at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Sefi studied computer science and biology with an undergraduate degree in Hebrew University and a master's from Weizmann. They both have been working in high tech in Tel Aviv. When I came to Israel, I was older. So I was inducted in the Israeli army, originally in the civil defense unit. Then I moved to the Navy. But really, I did reserve duty a number of times, but the total was only about 3 months. So I really didn't have much of an Israeli military experience. However, during one of my basic training, I was doing guard duty one night with an Ethiopian immigrant. During the night, we talked about it, and I talked to him about his Aliya experience. He told me that he walked with his family from Ethiopia, through Sudan, through Egypt to get to Israel. And unfortunately, one of his children died along the way. I asked him how he and his family were adjusting to life in Israel. And he told me when he was in Ethiopia, he was a farmer. It was easy for him to feed his family. But being in Israel, he was an assistant carpenter and he didn't make enough money. So he said, even though it was hard on him, he still felt it was better for his kids to be in Israel. During the late 80s, we had a lot of immigration from the Soviet Union. We actually went from 4 million citizens in Israel to 5 million in a couple of years. And they were built in Haifa, down below us in Haifa, a big trailer park. And that trailer park was to house the Soviet immigrants and also Ethiopians. And we had a friend who was a volunteer at the trailer park. And she met an Ethiopian boy. And this guy was asking about where can he get some engineering books to study. Well, she told him that she has a friend who is a professor at Technion, and they got together, and we made an arrangement for him to come visit me. When Hailu Mulugatu walked into my office, it was amazing. He looked at my bookshelf and he said, I've seen that book, and I've seen that book, and I studied that in Addis Ababa. And so he told me that his family left Ethiopia before he finished high school. I asked him a kind of a simple engineering question, and he answered it correctly. And then I asked him, do you want to understand the fundamental reason for that answer? His eyes lit up and he said, yes, please. Well, I didn't know his situation, so I just collected notebooks and papers and pencils, and I gave him an engineering book. And I said, look, I'm going on sabbatical for a year soon. But when I come back, please come and see me. And he went off. After that, we have a Technion preparatory school. I contacted the administration. I said, you've got to let this guy in. He's special. And when I came back, I found out that he was let into the preparatory school. He did the best that any Ethiopian student had ever done. And Hailu finished and completed his mechanical engineering degree in our department in Technion. And he went to become an officer in the Israeli army as an engineer. A number of years later, I got a phone call from the Army radio. And they said they're doing a special program for Pesach. And they decided they wanted to interview some soldiers. And they asked the soldiers to choose someone who had influenced their lives. Well, it turns out that Hailu chose me. And I went down to Tel Aviv and we had the interview. It was great seeing him. I learned that he had married, his wife was a nurse, and he was doing really well as an engineer in the army. Later, near Pesach, they aired the radio program, and I got a phone call from a man who had heard the interview. And he called me up and he told me that he was one of the pilots who flew the Ethiopians to Israel during Operation Solomon in 1991. So we talked about the difficulties and successes of the Ethiopians. And this just shows you Israel is really kind of a big family. It's a country that has big family in many ways. Now, Technion. My academic life at Technion has been fantastic. I love research. I like teaching. And I've been free to do anything I want almost. And fortunately, I joined at a time when we didn't have to get lots of money, contract money, so my life was just terrific. I ended up teaching dynamics, which is the heaviest course in the undergraduate curriculum. It's the hardest course, and I taught it for over 30 years. And I also introduced Continuum Mechanics as a graduate course in 1983. I retired as a professor emeritus the 1st of October in 2019. However, I love doing research, and so I continue to have fun at home. And now, of course, it's in my little office at home, and I'm not going into Technion because of the COVID. My late colleague, Saul Bodner, told me once that he hopes he stops writing papers before his friends tell him to stop writing papers. Well, we all know that there's a kind of a hill. In age, there's a hill. And we usually can wake up and realize we're on the other side of the hill, but we never see the top of the hill. So I know that I'm thinking slower and I'm making more mistakes and I have to be more careful in my work, but I still have a lot of research ideas that I'm playing with and I want to continue to try to answer those questions. I'd like to kind of summarize a couple things that I think I've learned over the last 38 years here in Israel. One is diaspora Jews and Israelis don't have the same experience. Diaspora Jews who want to maintain their Jewish identity have to be connected with the synagogue to meet friends and schmooze with other Jews. On the other hand, secular Israelis don't have to join the synagogue. We have Jews all over the place. And the Jewish holidays are the national holidays. And the kids in kindergarten learn about the Jewish holidays. Our grandson, who's here for 2 months, is in a little kindergarten. He learned all about the stories he knows more about the stories of Hanukkah than I do. Now, this difference has positive and negative effects. Diaspora Jews probably have a more spiritual connection to Judaism than Israelis, or at least secular Israelis. On the other hand, Israelis grew up in a majority, and that's an experience that's foreign to the diaspora. Now, it's very hard for Westerners to understand the Middle East. Now, let me just give you, every time I think rationally about the Middle East, I'm making a mistake. And that's hard for Westerners to understand. Let me just give you an idea. Unlike America, if you had 8 people together and you had a cake, they'd agree to divide it into 8 equal slices and everybody would be happy. Here in the Middle East, there's going to be somebody that says it's my cake and I don't want to share it with anybody. Now, when I get upset about politics and think I have a better answer, I have to remember that our problems are really complicated. The best politicians in the world have tried to help us for 72 years to solve our problems, and unfortunately with little success. Like my research, some problems don't have solutions yet. Unfortunately, I don't think we can solve our problems with the Palestinians in the near future. Instead, we need to find a humane way to maintain our security and manage the problem for the foreseeable future. Okay, why I moved to Israel. In traveling to conferences and being on sabbatical, I've met many people, and some of them asked me why I moved to Israel. I've got kind of three answers. An ideological answer is that I feel it's important to be a member of the tribe. The Jewish people need a homeland, and I'm honored to have been part of Israel's development for more than half of its life. A practical answer is that I like it here. When I have a beer on my balcony, and on Mount Carmel, and I look to the sunset in the Mediterranean, I say people pay a lot of money to be in a vacation spot like this. Yesterday, we took our grandson Leo to the beach, and we were playing on the beach. It was 70 some degrees. Today, I was sitting out on the balcony with Lori for lunch, and also trying to practice for this talk today. And the sun is beautiful right now. So these are just wonderful things for me. A more emotional answer is that engineers make significant contributions to the security and economics of Israel. I've been a professor at Technion, which is the best engineering institute in the country. I'm very proud that many of my students are contributing to Israel every day, and some of them are managers in important research institutes. The bottom line is that I'm confident that I could not have found a better job satisfaction anywhere else in the world. Now, Talia, would you put the last picture on? Okay, I want to introduce you to my family. Of course, you can see me, and Lori is kind of next to me. That's the beautiful white hair. On the right-hand side, we have Adam, our son, and Donna, his wife. And on the left, the tall guy is Daniel, our son, and Sefi, his husband, and they live in Tel Aviv. And in the middle is Leo, our 5.5-year-old grandson. And then there's Tommy on the right, who's almost 2 years old. And this was on the third night of Hanukkah, just a little more than a week ago. So thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions. That's what I had to say tonight, or today, for you.
Miles, thank you. That was just a wonderful, enjoyable, interesting, and really to the point. I think there are a lot of takeaways from your conversation. What I would like to do is to open up the forum to anybody that might have questions. Talia, could you organize that for us?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was also just going to add one thing that I had a question, and I'll just introduce myself quickly because I see there are a lot of faces that might not know who I am. So hi everyone, I'm Talia. Happy to be working with Bruce this year, as Bruce is the new Israel Affairs Committee chairman, and I'm the Israeli shlicha. So it means shaliach means emissary. So the Jewish agency sends Israelis all over to communities in America, and we get to work with Jewish congregations. Specifically, I'm in Pnei Tzedek congregation, which is the shul, but there's shlichim here at JCCs, federations, synagogues. So it's really an honor to be here and be part of these special gatherings that we have. And Miles, thank you so much. First of all, it's such a pleasure to hear you speaking about Israel like that. It just, you may have been noticing I was smiling the whole time. So thank you for sharing your story. And I wanted to just add to the point that I love the way you described, about Israelis, secular Israelis, and how we relate to Judaism. And I think that some of my other shlichim friends and I kind of coined the phrase being Israeli Jewish, which just means, just by living in the country, you feel Jewish, and you don't have to do much to to act upon it. Just like you said, you really need to sort of actively be Jewish when you're in America, but when you're in Israel, just by being there and just by having the national holidays, it's part of your culture. And that I feel that it's a lot more, Judaism is more of a cultural and traditional thing and less of a religion thing for a lot of the Israelis. And I was just wondering if I was born to also parents that made Aliyah. And I have to say that I'm always grateful that I was born in Israel. And I wonder if your kids and your family now, how do they feel about the fact that you made Aliyah? How do they feel about their life growing up in Israel?
Well, let me comment on one thing you said. I think that there's a double-edged sword there, because if you just feel connected to Israel because you were born here, it reduces, in a sense, the reason that the country exists, and you may not feel as strongly connected. So in some sense, the spiritual part is important. It's not enough. I mean, not that I want to be religious, but it's just not enough to say, okay, Jewishness is around me. You have to have a reason to stay here, because there's lots of struggles. I mean, people, there's the army, there's the cost of living. It's I compared with my friend in Switzerland, the cost of housing, and he gets a tremendous salary, but still our housing costs were higher per salary than his. So there's lots of challenges, and you have to really want it. Our kids, it's difficult because they're our older son Adam and Daniel, they're both, I don't know whether Daniel's, I know, listening. They have different connections to the country, and it's hard to say. I don't know where they're going to end up living. I mean, Adam right now is in with his family in Germany. I hope they come back. Daniel's living in, and Sephir living in Tel Aviv. I hope they stay, but they're not connected in the same way, because the person who chooses to come here is really connected if they stay. And I want to say one more thing about people coming here. Right now, I don't know whether Jeremy's listening in or not, but his son is visiting on a program. I think these are very important things that can influence people. And anybody, in my case, I knew that if I didn't try to come and live here, I would regret it. Lori and I have met a number of people that have come here and gone back. And I don't look at that as a failure. I think that it enhances their life, it enhances their experience, enhances their connection with Israel. And it's important to try things that you want to do in life, because if you don't try them, you're never gonna get there. So I can't really answer it. I don't know where our kids are going to end up, and they could end up any place. I know a lot of my colleagues have kids that live in the States or other places, but I can say one thing, that now I know what I did to my parents by taking the kids away. So I tell the kids, we raised you to be independent. You're going to make decisions, but I'd still like you to live close by. Not too close by, but close by. So we'll see. I can't answer it, Aliya.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I would like to add one thing. So on the call, and you can see in the screen, is Janice Broner. Janice is Miles's aunt and the daughter of Israel Reiskin. So I never had the pleasure of meeting Israel Reiskin, but Janice, it must have taken a huge amount of courage for your dad to do what he did, and to come to the United States as a young man, serve in the U.S. Army, be a prisoner of war in Germany, and then have this feeling, the Zionistic feeling, that he and Chaim transferred to Miles, and hence the reason for our conversation today, and Miles's family, Miles and Lori's family, and their kids, and the impact that they've had through lots of different activities it really is a wonderful story. And Janice, of all the people in that photo, you're our witness to this. And I've always enjoyed your conversations about your father, how he had such a love for Israel. And I think that it's, I always tell our sons, don't forget your heritage, which I think is a very important aspect to being Jewish and having this wonderful inheritance that we have. Janice, do you have anything to say? Oh, I think you're muted. Lisa,
Muted, yeah.
yeah. They're unmuting. Let's see. Okay,
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
we can
Yeah.
hear you.
Okay. Well, my father's life was very different. His whole life as a young boy was that he wasn't free to do what he wanted to do. He was the second child. Therefore, in Russia, he was not allowed to go to school beyond a certain grade. And he was very obstinate about what he wanted to do. So he decided he would come to America and join his aunt who lived in the Washington area when he was 14. He never ever, he tried to go to night school when he was here. And since he went into the service at a young age, he was always concerned. He was always treated as what he said was a greenhorn. He was never a first-class citizen in Russia, and he didn't feel he was a first-class citizen in the United States. He went into the army, and the guys there was a group that formed a Jewish league, and they fought in the First World War. So his longing for recognition as a full-class, first-class citizen was to go to Israel, because that's where he felt he would capture what he was looking for, and that was to be in a place where he was considered, as he said, a first-class citizen. But I don't think I don't remember his ever really speaking to Miles about going to Israel, but I think maybe Miles saw his love for Israel, and knowing that his mother had gone to Israel as a child. And he knew that my father was very involved in Zionism, and my father supported all causes for Jews around the world to be able to have a decent life and to find their way to Israel. He wanted to live there, and my mother did not, but he gave up that dream of living in Israel, and he made his life here. But it seems that in his family, he had first cousins. Chaim was one of them, and Harry Dobkin was another, who went to Israel to retire, made their life there. Harry was always involved in Jewish causes. So it was just part of his family that was very involved, always had that wonderful feeling of wanting to be in Israel, the home of the Jews. So Miles made his own decision based upon his findings, upon his exposures. And I give him a lot of credit for finding his way to do and be what he wanted. He's a wonderful young man. And I do consider him a young man, although
Not so young.
They weren't
You're still a kid.
Well, they weren't Orthodox either. They were more secular.
Yeah. Well, people, even in the First World War, I know my father, before he went, he used to lay tefillin every day, they tell me. And when he went to war in Europe in the First World War, he lost all of his feeling for religion. Because when you've seen death around you, when you've been fighting, you just, he knew his prayers, and he knew he was Jewish. And as Miles said, there are two kinds of Jews in Israel. Well, I'm sure he would have been the second kind. The second kind, those who are Israelis and those who are, and that's enough for them, but they are not really devoted to the religion. So that's all I can say. And I think the whole family has respected Miles for his decision and how he's lived his life. And we love him.
Thank you, Janice. Those were really great words and thoughts. There have to be a few other questions.
It was so clear, my lecture.
There was a hand raised
He
before.
told everything.
There was someone who raised a hand before. I don't see her now though. Right? Or was it maybe Jean? Was that you that had a hand raised?
It's my brother.
Any questions for
Well,
Miles?
I'll say something. This is Lisa. This is Janice Brenner's eldest daughter. And one thing that's been nice, yes, Miles has made Aliya, but he has maintained being a member of the family, and all the kids know his children or have met them through the years. We love his wife as well. So even though he lives a physical distance from us, some of us have been able to visit him in his home and see his beautiful view of the Mediterranean and sunsets off his balcony. But they're still family. We're still close. And technology has enabled us to stay close, whether we're talking about a family, hello, how are you? You know, someone sending their son over for school, high school for a semester, or what we're reading in book group. It's nice that you can carry on everyday conversations in this way as frequently as you like.
Yeah, it's really different now with, can anybody hear me? Yeah?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, when we first got here, you wrote an aerogram. It took 10 days to go one direction or the other. We used to every few months do a little tape and send it to the family of our kids. So now that you have Zoom and Skype and everything else, it's much better. But still, now that our grandkids are in Germany, it's not the same as having them here. So we're really enjoying that. But you're right. We've made, well, we've been in California. We used to go to California for 2 months every summer because I would be working at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in the research group. So, and in that sense, my parents kind of missed out because we saw them for a week or so on the way over and a week or so on the way back. But we try to maintain contact with family just in general. We have a very long email list of all the people we picked up during sabbatical and everything else. But it's important to us anyway, and I think it's important to our kids too.
That's a great legacy, Miles, unto itself.
And
I
you've been
feel like
successful.
I'm going to die tomorrow. I don't want to do that. You know?
Yeah, you could. They could. Where are they going to?
Yeah, that's right. We're going to have to get the corona vaccine on Wednesday. So who knows?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
There's Lori. Lori's got a question. You have to unmute, Lori.
okay.
Lori, did you have a question? Appleton?
That's
Okay, you
not
have to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Very few people ask. me
I
to
knew my
unmute,
sister would
so
say something.
It's unusual for people to ask me to unmute. Normally the opposite, but yeah, I have a question because this has been very interesting to listen to Miles talk and be muted so that I could actually listen to him. And what I wanted to know is that I was confused. So I'm his sister. I'm his youngest sister, his baby sister. And I
Only sister.
confused when he went to Israel. It confused me tremendously. I didn't get it. And I went to go visit him and I definitely didn't get it because some people would say they went to Israel and they threw themselves on the ground and they're kissing the ground, the most wonderful place in the world. And my grandfather loved it and whatever. And I was there and had a good time going to the beach and I came home and I had no interest in going back. There was no emotional connection at all. And so I guess I was curious about what is that something that you felt and maybe other people on the call feel that draws them to the country where there are other people that might think, nice vacation, see you later, good luck, you know, and there wasn't a connection. So I'd be kind of curious about that, because you had to fight for that. This was not easy. So you had to really love it. So I guess I'm curious about that.
Well, I tried to answer it, and apparently, you know, maybe it's too much to cram into 20 minutes or half an hour, but I think the bottom line is really, in a sense, it's two things: job satisfaction and enjoying living here. The job satisfaction is really, as I said, the students that I've taught are really doing something important. I mean, it's not just artificial what they do. They're saving lives. They're doing all kinds of things that are important for the country. And that makes it just a bigger experience. It's much better than me teaching at Berkeley or something and just another student. So that's important to me. That makes me feel really good. And the other is I like it. I mean, it's like I went out into California and I said, hey, wait, it's December. I can run in a short sleeve shirt. This is terrific. Well, it's the same as here. We're the same latitude as San Diego. Life's good. The Mediterranean is warm water too. So for me, even my choice of SRI, I chose it because it was less formal. I interviewed at IBM one time. You had to wear a tie and everything. At SRI, you could actually hire your boss. Well, I was teaching for many years in shorts at Technion. And I'm the one who was walking around the campus, exercising. Well, I got to say, one thing is funny. One of the secretaries told me about, I guess it was now, maybe 10 years ago. She says, I think it's time to put a shirt on when you walk around campus. So I got myself a running shirt because it was hot. But I just like it. And the Mediterranean's wonderful. And we've made a good life here. But it's not for everybody. But it's more for, like I said, I was looking for something fulfilling, a bigger impact. There's something, not everybody needs that. It's enough to have your family, but for me, it wasn't enough. So I have this. I don't know whether that's what I tried to answer anyway.
I can add something. I know that I may be biased as obviously growing up in Israel, but there is something that I feel, and especially being a shaliach, being a person that goes to another country and tries to put into words what it is to be Israeli. So this whole year obviously has been very teaching for me on how to describe it. But I think there is something, and as you said, it's a feeling. It's something that you really feel in your gut, and you either feel it or you don't. So I can understand when people don't have that connection. But there is something about Israel, and I'm sorry if I sound cheesy, but it's like being a part of something bigger. And there is something about the fact that it is a country that, you know, you can go and feel safe as a Jewish person, whether you've come from somewhere else, as Miles said, you know, people coming from other countries and finding a place of refuge, but also as someone who grows up there, you do feel like you're part of a tribe, as you said. And it's like if you were in a Jewish community and you found your congregation and you found your people and you feel really connected to them. I feel like that is what it can be like in Israel as well, for a lot of people. It's feeling that sort of warmth and friendliness and like one big family. And I think it's always funny when you see Israelis, when you're traveling around the world and you happen to see Israelis and you may not know them at all, but you hear Hebrew speaking and you're just instantly as if like you're best friends. And you know that they'll call you like my brother or my sister. And it's that kind of feeling that I hope I managed to articulate it, but it's really that sort of sense of we're all connected and we're all in this together kind of thing. And it's really that camaraderie that I think is that feeling that people connect to so much.
I guess I would say that we're really a whole bunch of people coming from different places. So not everybody is as connected. I mean, you painted a very nice picture, but the overall picture is this is the Jewish homeland. And that's important. But I can't say that I'm friends with everybody on the street.
No, of course not. I'm just saying that kind of feeling when especially when you're abroad and you're not in Israel, you kind of get that, we need to be together.
anyway, it is, but it's not everybody's going to be. It's not the same thing for everybody. That's for sure. But it is important. I think it's really important that there's a Jewish state and it's Israel and it's maintained and we continue to contribute to it. And we're going to do the best we can to deal with our problems the best we can. So, you know.
I see that Gary has his hand raised. And you just need to unmute.
I know, that's scary. There we go.
Okay. Hi, Miles. I don't know whether you recall meeting me when I was there with Bruce some years ago. But I thank you very much for this very interesting talk, both on the engineering level and on the personal level. As someone who went to RPI, I appreciated that earlier part too. But my question is this about the Technion. You're Jewish. What's the experience of professors or faculty at the Technion who are not Jewish? Does it parallel any of your experience, or do they have a different experience?
Well, I think it's hard for me to answer that. I have a very good colleague, Mahmoud Jabarin, who's an Israeli Muslim Arab, and he's an associate professor in civil engineering. We've worked together for a long time. And I've also had a student who was a PhD and then a postdoc, another Mahmoud Safadi. I don't look at it as like, well, maybe I think the easiest thing I could say is this. When I was a kid going to Hebrew school, we'd go to Hebrew school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I'd get on the bus and I'd have a Hebrew book. And for whatever reason, I flipped it over so people couldn't see the Hebrew. You know, I felt like, you know, I didn't want to be different. And what I want to say is that on campus, we have maybe 14, even more than that percent Arab students, okay? You hear Arabic spoken everywhere. If you're in the swimming pool, it's spoken freely. So at least in the Technion bubble, people aren't afraid to be themselves, okay? Now, we have a very small percentage of Arab faculty. And I think anybody who's not a majority feels a little different than the other people. And I can say, you know, it was really strange. One time I was in dynamics, I was teaching, and I was announcing in the beginning of the class when the exams were, and I realized that I'd put one of the exams on the 25th of December. Didn't hit me. It was just another day. And then I realized that, and I said, if anybody has an issue, then you come back to me and we'll deal with it. So I can't speak for them, but I don't think it's different than any other minority in another place. I mean, in the United States, Christian holidays are celebrated. Now, do you feel a minority and not feel a minority? I don't know. So we do have in our faculty, we have a guy who's from the Netherlands, and he's married to, I don't know whether his wife's Israeli or not, but anyway, he lives there. So we have a few people that are not Jewish, but it's not as big as, I think it'll get bigger as we've become much more international. So I think naturally it's going to get a bigger community. But I don't think that they can feel the same kind of connection I feel, meaning that it's important to have a Jewish state, and it's important for the Jewish people to teach, you know, engineers and things like that. So, but it's a very good place to be. And we're getting students now from all over the world, and especially now from China, because we have a connection with China. So it wouldn't be the same. My guess is it wouldn't be the same, but my colleague, he has his frustration sometimes. And certainly, I'll tell you, frankly, my graduate student, there was a war here. And during that war with Lebanon, there were a group of Israelis that were outside the main entrance to the Arab area of Haifa saying, you know, death to the Arabs. That's not comfortable to be in, but that's not the whole society. So it's, but on the other hand, he says he wouldn't live in America with Trump. So, I mean, Trump is not going to be anymore, but it's a difficult question. I can't answer it. It's certainly not simple, but the bottom line is, if you're a minority, you're going to feel different. But I don't think we try to still have freedom for minorities. And Haifa is a great city from that point of view, because we have Arab areas and we have Muslim and Christian and we have Jewish, and it's not like we're all mixed, but we're interacting in a relatively positive way in a difficult climate, political climate, that is. So I hope that answers a little bit. Thanks for your question, Gary.
Thank you for the answer. Hope to see you again soon.
Okay, come to Haifa.
Many of us
can't fly, so that's a problem.
Many of us are itching to get to Israel, Miles. Me for one.
Okay, well, as my father said at my wedding, you're welcome, but not all at once.
I think Bill had a question. Did you have a question, Bill?
Yeah, I was told at the last minute about this event, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very, very informative. I'm a neighbor of Bruce's. We've been friends for a very long time. And I just hope that this is being recorded so I could pass it on to my children and grandchildren. I think it was an extremely interesting and informative discussion.
Well,
Thank you very much for doing it.
Thanks, Bill. We have to have a few other questions.
Yeah, I feel like this is a family, so it's not fair. Everybody's being so nice to everybody.
Well, it is being recorded, and once it's uploaded, I'm sending it to Bruce and he can pass it along.
Okay, great. Thanks for your help, Talia.
Sure. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Miles. It really was a pleasure to hear your story, and thank you for everyone for joining us as well.
Excuse me one second. This is Marla. I'm a cousin of Miles. So anyway, it's great to see family. But Miles, I always wondered why you went over to Israel, and I have to tell you, this was a phenomenal presentation. Loved it. Excellent.
Great.
Yeah.
I hope I answered your question, at least partially.
You did. You
Okay.
did. I thought it was superb.
But really, the answer is personal, so it's not for everybody, but it is for me.
Right. And I got to see a number of my different cousins.
Good.
Hey, Lori, good. Karen, Lisa. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Thank you, Marla.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Miles, also,
Yes.
I want to thank you for introducing us to Dr. Soloff, because that was also a phenomenal presentation. So we appreciate your support of our congregation here in Washington and Potomac.
Yeah, she's really good. It was great working with her, and she's really a dynamic lady, and I'm sure she'll be very successful at Technion. Okay, great. Well, seeing everybody,
Miles,
I guess have a rest of your good day.
Yes, and Miles, keep on making the contributions that you're making. And Lori, give our love to the family, and thank you both for being on with us.
Okay, take care.